In Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Ultron is the brainchild of both Hank Pym and Tony Stark. Ultron and a lot of what he is was built on the foundation of Hank Pym, as Hank not only built Ultron, but also trained Ultron's AI off of his own brainwaves. Tony Stark later came in and tried to add weapons before Hank quickly shut that down. Ultron was supposed to be a force for peace for the world, but it was trained off of Hank himself. What I'm getting at here is that Ultron, for all intents and purposes, is Hank Pym. Maybe not exactly, but the characters share an extreme amount of similarities in this show, and I don't think that was a mistake at all. Much like how it's never a mistake to help keep yourself protected on the internet. And that's where today's sponsor, Aura, will come in. Aura will make sure that all of your online information is protected and secure. Unfortunately, like many of you, I have AT&T as my phone provider. And unfortunately, AT&T had a massive data leak a few months back. Ever since then, not only have I been getting spam calls, but I've also been receiving a lot of really convincing spam text messages, and that could put my personal channel and brand at risk. So thankfully for me, Aura reached out, not only offering help to me, but offering help to all of you to help keep you guys safe on the internet. So stop letting these data brokers expose your personal information. Go to the link in the description, aura.com/venxous, for your 14-day free trial to see how much of your information has been sold on the internet. Once again, thank you to the sponsor of this video, Aura, and without further ado, let's get back to talking about Hank and Ultron. Now, throughout Earth's Mightiest Heroes, we had seen Ultron in a variety of different places. This was Hank's solution to having a world filled with violence. Ultrons were supposed to act as miniature therapists, having one for each villain that the Avengers would lock up in 42. So Ultron was supposed to be nothing more than a gentle caregiver. It wasn't until Kang's invasion that Hank was forced to put Ultron online fully and was forced to unlock his capability to feel violence, to feel aggression, and as well to be able to do harm. Ultron was never originally meant to do harm. Oddly enough, that is much like Hank himself. Hank never wanted to do harm. Hank had only ever in his life wanted to help rehabilitate the villains that he came across in his everyday life. He believed in rehabilitation. But oddly enough, despite being trained off of Hank's brain waves, the Ultron bots seem to find themselves getting more and more aggressive, especially when it comes to quote-unquote cleansing the world of the issues that they're facing. Unlike Hank himself, who seemingly wanted nothing more to do with the Avengers, believing them to be nothing more than crime fighters who did not care much for rehabilitation of their villains. And that led to him wanting to leave the team. He didn't believe in what the Avengers stood for anymore, and so he wanted out. And funnily enough, Ultron just so happened to gain full sentience in this episode as well, and decide that he needed to cleanse the entire world of the scourge of humanity because nobody would be safe unless humanity was gone and simply replaced by synthetics. But I have a few odd points that I wanted to talk about when it comes to Ultron, and these were hints obviously in the episode because we didn't know at the time that Ultron was trained off of Hank's brainwaves, but he can't hurt Janet at all. Ultron has zero issue harming a lot of different heroes in this show, but he can't touch Janet no matter how badly he himself wants to. I think it was a cue for us, the audience, to realize that Ultron is far more like Hank than we may have been led to believe from the start. And in totality, Hank ends up blaming himself heavily for Ultron because he trained Ultron off of his own brainwaves. And that's kind of it for the first season. Ultron himself is set up, but not given a whole lot to do, other than helping move Hank's character along more. But it starts to get really juicy in Season 2. It isn't until Season 2 that Ultron truly finally starts to feel a sense of self for himself outside of just being a killing machine designed to rid the world of imperfections and of crime. And the first thing Ultron decides to do with this newfound freedom is to build his vision for the future, a vision of synthetic robots that act just like people, except under his full control. And I think that's very important that we state this. I'm starting to wonder if Hank himself honestly wanted rehabilitation for villains, or if Hank simply wanted them to act like him, to be under his control so that the world could be perfect through his own eyes. Ultron offers an interesting parallel to this, in my opinion, because his vision for the world isn't too different from the exact same one Hank had. And season 2 helps to expand upon this because we start to see the mental blurred lines of Hank himself as he kind of starts to lose it throughout a majority of season 2. All while Ultron seems to find a better sense of himself, even if it is oddly blurred towards being more and more human, despite his outward hate for humanity and their general chaos.
I designed you to be my perfect vision of destruction. And yet you allowed the Avengers to prevail. Your failure is disappointing, but it matters little.
He even goes as far as making himself a companion, that being Jocasta, what he wants to be his robotic wife. A great shout out to, obviously, his wife in the comic books around that time. Now, Ultron himself is also having an interesting crisis when it comes to the Avengers. He seemingly doesn't want to get rid of them at all, but instead would rather keep them around long enough to siphon all of their abilities and powers and turn them into his own robotic army. All because he can't seem to let go of them, almost as though he feels a sick sort of connection to them. Not to mention the fact that Ultron gives explicit orders to Vision that he is not to make Janet into one of these robots. He is to capture Janet peacefully and not harm her at all in order to bring her into his own lair so that he may turn her into his weird robot girlfriend. And this presents a problem for Vision, as it seems to defy any sort of logic at all, that he would want to keep the Avengers alive, and that he would also want to save Janet specifically for something different. It seems illogical to his vision of the world. A logical fallacy so big it causes Vision to question if he even knows what he's doing by this point. If Ultron is even moving towards a regular goal, because Ultron is acting just as illogical as the humans. He's not as perfect as he wants to perceive himself to be to the humans. He is just as illogical, because Ultron is just like Hank Pym. And we even see his more protective side of Janet flare up heavily when Vision ends up having to hurt Janet in order to capture her properly so that she may be taken to Ultron. It's also one of the few times we actually see these characters get a significant injury, which is highly interesting.
You were not to harm her. Why have you deviated from your program?
And even Janet goes out of her way to point out just how human all of this is, and just how weird it is that Ultron wants to have her as his robot girlfriend forever. And Ultron continues to refuse that any of this means something to him. He's in denial, much like Hank spent a lot of this season in denial. And I mean, there's a whole episode, he really only appeared in 2.
Humans are so horrible and imperfect, then why are you acting just like one? Look at what you're doing. You're making yourself a girlfriend? You don't even see it, do you? You're becoming just like us.
And in Ultron's want and need to be more human, as much as he denies that he wants to be this way, he ends up destroying his own vision of the world. Vision ends up turning on Ultron because he is acting illogical, because he himself was able to break his own programming due to Ultron's mental fallacies, in all honesty. And because Ultron is so human and acts just like Hank, it just simply ends not well for him. His vision for the world doesn't truly exist anymore, not in the original way that it was intended to exist. And therefore, Ultron's purpose does not exist anymore as well. He deviated from his original plan, which was to serve and protect humanity. He deviated from his second vision of the world, in which he must wipe out all of humanity to protect it. And now he's deviated even further once again, simply because he wants to keep these humans around as pets and as robots for him to use. Nothing about Ultron in this episode is particularly logical. He spends a majority of it being illogical. And I think this was really great in parallel to Hank's entire character arc throughout not only the first season, but through the second as well. Hank spent a majority of the first season having this vision and having this dream of the world that he truly believed he could help manufacture if he was also an Avenger at the same time. And it was that slow realization that Hank was only really an Avenger for Janet. He didn't care about what the team was doing nor what they truly wanted. He was only really there for Janet. And so when he finally met his breaking point, he left. And when Hank ended up leaving, we started to see a lot of his mental health declining. Hank is, for all intents and purposes, an allegory for poor mental health and what happens when it isn't managed properly. And Ultron is like if you had a child who had to grow up in a home like that, who also never received any sort of help. He ended up being twisted, contorted, and overall a false vision of what Hank wanted him to be. And there's also just the fact that Hank is the reason Ultron is like this, just because of his brainwaves being mapped onto Ultron. Hank might not have known it at the time, but the dude is extremely unstable, and we see that a lot in season 2. We see that Hank gets extremely angry and frustrated and less like himself, especially when he was confronting Scott Lang. Hank had pretty much fallen off the wagon by this point, and we only saw a slower and slower descent into madness for Hank. He even ended up taking on a whole new vigilante persona and a personality far more akin to Ultron himself, in which Hank takes on a far more antagonistic and aggressive approach towards being a superhero. He cares very little about their mental health and just simply cares about locking these villains up and keeping them far away from any sort of regular society. It's very interesting that Yellow Jacket is honestly extremely similar to Ultron, not only in end goals, but also in the way in which they decide to go about achieving said goals. And I think personally that this was always a part of Hank, just something he never really saw coming, nor really believed himself to be capable of doing. And that's why it ended up imprinted onto Ultron. Now, you can make arguments for the fact that enabling Ultron to be more aggressive might have changed the way in which he as a robot thought, but I would argue that it was always a part of Ultron, much like how Yellow Jacket was always a part of Hank, and it just took a particularly stressful situation to pull this personality out of each character. So to wrap this all up neatly and nicely in a bow, I believe that Ultron is far more like Hank than any of us would like to believe. As a matter of fact, I think Ultron is Hank Pym for all intents and purposes, just not exactly like him. He is all of the worst parts of Hank Pym, all put into one specific place. But at least out of all of it, all of the pain, the suffering, and the death caused by both parties, honestly, we were able to get something great out of it. And that would be the vision for the world Ultron saw, and Hank saw. Vision was the greatest thing to come from both of those characters. a true beacon of hope and potentially greatness. Somebody who overcame their programming and overcame their circumstances in which they started to become a hero. And I think that's beautiful. Well, alright then. I just want to say thank you all for watching this video. I have definitely been thinking about making this one since I started watching season 2. Gosh, back in June, when I started actually cracking into season 2. The parallels between Ultron and Hank and the idea that it's made off of his brainwaves in this show. You know, if you like the video, please leave a like. It helps out the channel a lot. If you want to subscribe, it's free. You can always unsubscribe later. As well, you know, if you don't like the video, please leave a dislike and then let me know down below why you disliked the video. As well, I also run a Patreon in which you can help not only support the channel, but also gain a few perks for yourself, all for about $1 a month. You'll be able to contact me through my Discord and just get to see more behind the scenes when it comes to my YouTube channel and how I go about doing it. As well, you can also gain access to a $5 tier in which will be shouted out at the end of every single one of these videos. And you'll also get to see each video early and unedited. And it's about that time in the video that I shout out all of those in the $5 and above tier. So shout out Gabriel Lafonte, shout out Transgers1, Video Gamer 75, Golden Boy 420, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. Y'all are amazing, and I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day.